I'm in the toddler phase, and so I have a new friend, and we've just really been able to build community with them. He said to me, because he has a 2-year-old as well, never negotiate with a terrorist. And I said, Roger that.
Just by form of introduction, talk for a moment about the dad life and what's making you smile recently.
Yeah. Man, I would say watching my son get into prayer so intensely, even if it's a snack and he wants to thank God for the pickles and the water and the plates and everything. It's crazy. And so he's the prayer monitor for us. And I just seeing how our devotion to prayer
Yeah.
throughout the day and bedtime and all that kind of stuff is really rubbing off on him. And at 2.5, it's making me smile quite a bit. So
Well, it's fun that you brought up prayer right away because that was one of my questions. Is you and your wife did a released a podcast episode together just recently around prayer and around the power of praying. I know you guys didn't write the series, but on a praying wife, praying husband, praying parent. What have been a
yeah.
few of your takeaways from kind of diving into that resource? And we'll link you to the show notes for the guys who are curious. But yeah, what have been some of the new insights you've taken away from that series?
Well, what I would say to the guys listening is The Power of a Praying Husband by Stormy. First of all, she knows how to write to men. She knows how we think and she gets it. And her chapters are really short and the
Yes.
prayers are short, and you like take something away every time.
Yeah.
So I think that has been one of my big takeaways is that it's written for men. And the book has really touched me. I was up in Alaska as we are launching locations for our ministry up there. And I was meeting with a chaplain and just struggling with my marriage and struggling with the challenges of communication. And my wife and I work together, and, our past and some mistakes that we made and things like that. And, we were having a conversation about that. And he looked at me and he said, Ben, are you praying for your wife every day? And I just looked at him and said, no, I'm not. And he goes, I love you, dude, but that is why you're in the situation you're in. If you make that 1 2 degree shift, it will change everything. And I'm telling you, it has. And that book has really, last piece, it's given me a level of empathy. I'm not a high empathy guy. I'm a suck it up and get over it kind of guy, while asking for all the empathy in the world because can be such a baby about stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, I'm not a high empathy guy, and that book has given me an empathy for what women carry and the struggles they have that men have no idea. So, highly recommend the book, and highly recommend praying for your wife. My wife and my intimacy has radically exploded since then. So,
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for the recommend and the strong recommendation. This episode's going to launch around Memorial Day, and it's fairly common that that day can come and go without a pause, depending on the church community you're in, or your family, or if you served in the military, or have lost people who have close to you who died in combat protecting our country. But I know for you, I mean, this is a day that you've chosen to give your life to around themes of helping celebrate and honor those who have given. Can you just coach? Well, share some of your story in the setup, but then also just coach me as a dad that wants to be intentional with my 4 little girls on Memorial Day.
yeah, I think it's for me, I lost 7 of my guys at 21 years old in a combat zone. And you never forget those that have given their lives, and the fathers that were on those helicopters that died. And so Memorial Day, has a different sentiment to it when you've lost people in combat. And then, we did the Heroes Honor Festival of honoring and welcoming home Vietnam veterans at the Daytona Speedway in 2022. And that was, there were tens of thousands at that event. And so, that was a special weekend to remember everyone who's given their lives, but also honor those who were never welcomed home when they came home from combat. So, this date has a lot of weight for me. And I think it's important for dads that are listening as you're raising your kids, that you can take the time to educate them and let them know the freedom that we have today, and the freedom. There's places in the world where people don't get to choose what they want to eat or what they go and do. that they can't just go to church. It's illegal to go and worship God. You know, they'd say that there could be people from the government that could take this from you if it weren't for people that have fought from it. And kids are smart, man. They get it. And so I think that there's just opportunities to be very honest with our kids, going back from World War II until now, of, hey, these are the sacrifices that have been paid. Not to mention the sacrifices paid in the Civil War and the Revolutionary War for freedom from oppression, for rights and civil rights. And freedom is a great fight and a great struggle because the enemy hates freedom. The devil hates people living in freedom and being able to freely worship God. So I think that there's an opportunity for education. And it's kind of like going back to my son and how he prays.
Yeah.
He'll thank God for the smallest things. And it's like we need to be doing that and educating our kids that we have the freedom to do these things because of those who have fought for it.
Sacrificed. Yes. That's helpful. Thank you. I was thinking about just the area of deep passion of helping with transition, folks who have served in our armed forces who have transitioned home. And you explain in your book a little bit around the military being one of the most tribal places. Like this is a place with deep, deep community. And
Yeah.
then America being one of the most individualistic places ever.
The,
So the
the most.
right, the high tension difference, like dissonance even between those two cultures.
Yeah.
These are, I think, important as dads for us to understand where we live and what like stream we're floating in as far as that individualistic side.
Yeah.
And I want to raise my girls to think deep community, to think deep
Yep.
connectedness. How would you process that out for us dads?
Yeah, I think it's really important. We needed to find a church where we felt known. And that took finding a church that has 70, 80 people at it. It's not a mega church, it's not big. We had to go find a place where if we're not there, people are asking, where
Yeah,
were you? And not from a condemnation standpoint, because we missed you, we love you, right? That is teaching kids that you need to be seen and you need to be known. Um, just because technology has changed, just because the way of our world has changed, does not mean that the needs of the psyche and the human body and the soul have. The way that our souls and our psyches operate is the same, and the needs they have is the same of people that were 1,000 years ago. And if you go back to the early English settlers, if you took a Native American out of their tribe and put them with the white man, he fell apart. But if you took the white men out of their way of life, their civilization, you put them in the tribes, they thrived. And they actually had an issue with the early English settlements where they had settlers that were leaving and trying to join the tribes because they found something that you can't have anywhere else. And America is the most individualistic country in the world by multiple times. And so that's where that church community, that relational community, creating ways to get to know your neighbors. I remember on our street, we created, I live on, I won't say the name of the street, but I live on, because, all those people coming after me, Jeff. But we created a cook-off and I ordered a $9 trophy and
okay.
got it engraved with the name of our street for the cook-off champion.
Yeah.
And we did a cook-off. And so now twice a year we do these cook-offs
So
with our street. And now our street is like family. I just got a text from one of the people on our street saying, hey, some black F-150 just pulled out and could have hit somebody. Like, we need to be on the lookout for who this is. Like, we have a community group
for each other.
thread for our cul-de-sac. So,
Wow.
dude, it's just, you got to be a leader and take charge with it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, just trying to take even that a step deeper of how do we create that for our kids and yeah, I think church is a known spot that like as we decide how we engage in a local church in a way that's a neighborhood or the two that you brought up there, but just
Yeah.
realizing the drift as we get more and more busy is again towards us in our own schedule
Yep.
versus so maybe if you'd explain for a moment what happened and what has happened to um, men and women in the armed forces who transition home and how that disconnect has led to just such pain and hurt and
Yeah.
despair. Could you explain a little further how the effects of the difference of having deep community to not?
Well, your average soldier will leave high school, which high school is very tribal, and you're with people every day, right? And then they go to the military and their phones are taken away, their booze, their porn, everything is taken away. And they have to learn to work with this group of people for months at a time. I think it's one of the greatest things you could do to a person is for them to go through the military. And then from there, they go to their unit, whether they're in the guard, they go back to kind of civilian life and they still serve in that kind of tribe unit,
Mm.
or they're active duty and they serve on it 24/7 full time, right? And in that context, like, we just had an operation for a bunch of our soldiers in the Army, and there were thousands of them that went on this air assault operation for 3 weeks. 3 weeks away from their families. They had minimal cell phone use, and the entire time they are operating in a combat, simulated environment and working together, eating together, sleeping together, everything, like sharing everything. And we just don't realize that that is how humanity has lived for thousands of years. That's how Christ did life in a tribe. The discipleship was a tribe of
Yeah.
12. And when you look at that form, and then now I'm going to get out of the military and I'm going to leave this tribe and go into the most individualistic culture in the world. They did this massive study about 6 years ago where they were studying the drive time, the family time, TV time, everything like that when it comes to Americans. United States took number one over every other country multiple times because of how individualized we are, how independent we are. And so for a military person, you are taking them from the the essence of tribe and putting them in that culture. And it's a disaster. I remember when I came home from Iraq and I was transitioning out of the military, dude, I had a brutal time and I couldn't put my finger on what the issue was. And so I think it's really important for dads and for people in your community to just begin to understand what the veteran or what the former soldier is going through in their transition because of the psyche and the mindset of what they've come from and now what they've lost.
Yeah. Wanted to jump for a moment to your dad, and you dedicated your book.
Oh,
You said, "I dedicate this book to my dad. You taught me the power of relentless pursuit." But then throughout the book, some of I mean, the heartache moments and the really good. I mean, the prayer he prayed when he first held you and went to like, I mean, that story. I should probably have you just tell that story because that's like, I'm like, whoa, what
yeah.
vision your dad had in that moment. Go ahead and tell that story to start things off.
Well, my dad was the son of a Lutheran minister who beat my dad almost every day of his life. And my dad had horrific acne, and he was teased, he was bullied, and he just became a fighter, and he had such deep wounds and deep scars. My dad was addicted to pills and alcohol, and my dad carried so much shame, and he would just assault life because it was all that he had to make his depraved soul feel good. And it just felt like, in the time in the 80s and the 90s and things like that, like people didn't understand mental health. They didn't understand trauma. They didn't understand abuse. And to go from being in church on Sunday to watching your dad pastor to then being thrown in a closet and beaten by him. I mean, dude, that is unbelievable, right? And so, my dad really struggled in a lot of ways. But in a few very, very important areas, he crushed it. And the first was when I was born, he held me and was the first person to hold me. And then he handed me off to the nurse or whatever. And he actually left the OR or whatever, operating, the birthing room. And he went down to the chapel and he got on his knees. And my dad would always tell you that God had called him to be a music minister and a preacher of God's word. And he never did it because he was so wounded by God, he could never follow him to that degree. Right.
Yeah.
And he went down there and he got on his knees and he said, God, whatever blessing that you had for my life, I know I haven't obeyed you or fulfilled it, but will you give it to my son? And I commit his life to you that he would follow you. And it's like, you do something like that, right? That's a big win for a dad. The second thing about my dad is I never questioned how much he loved me. He would scream for hours at a time. He'd shove me around. He smacked me around a few times. He was emotionally a disaster. Um, but that man loved me furiously. Now it was a completely emotionally erratic, unhealthy love, right? But I never questioned how much my dad loved me, and he never used shame on me. I remember when I was at this event, or I was actually, it was after I got out of the military, I was touring with this worship band for the summer. And there was this leader that I was with, and I was like, I wish he'd have been my dad. Like, this guy was cool and fun and all the things that my dad wasn't, all this kind of stuff. And I wish this dude was my dad.
Mm.
And I remember we were doing this like combatives competition with the youth, and I was on this block, and we had these, like, sticks, whatever. And I go to battle with this. This kid was just a beast, and he knocks me off, right? And this leader shamed me in front of everybody and made fun of me. And I remember looking at him and going, my dad would never do that to me. And so, that was like a turning point with my dad. The third thing, so first was committing my life,
Yeah.
love, never shaming me. And the third was my dad assaulted everything that he did. And I watched him. I remember, so my dad wrote a book on the Bataan Death March, which was a death march that happened in World War II in Japan, where tens of thousands of soldiers died as they marched all these soldiers from one island of the Philippines to the other. And my dad was a salesman at the Minnesota Zoo, and there was a volunteer day, and they were honoring veterans. And he heard this guy talk about when and where he served. And my dad was like, I think you're a Bataan Death March survivor. For 3 years, my dad pursued that man weekly, asking him if he could interview him and hear his story. And for 3 years, he told him no.
Wow.
So finally, he said yes. And my dad spent the next 2 years going to his house weekly or bi-weekly for hours at a time, taking in his story. And it took 2 years to work through it, Jeff. And then my dad compiled all that into a book which is called Footprints in Courage. That is relentless pursuit. And it's like my dad, this man looked at my dad when it was all done, and he held him as he sobbed and said, I feel peace for the first time in 60 years because of what you've done for me. That is relentless pursuit.
I want
And that's
to,
what,
yeah.
go ahead.
I'm sorry I cut you off there, Ben. I just to pause in that for a moment of as a dad, do my four daughters, for you, does your son, all the dads listening, do your kids see you as someone who sticks with commitments, who
Yeah.
goes the extra mile, who brings a level of like deep resilience and deep conviction and deep passion and says, I don't back down, right? I just like it's a like the level of comfort in the world that we live. We talked about how individualistic and the level of comfort. I just don't think it's as normal for kids to see a dad who says, "No, this is the kind of man I've like." God created men to be strong and to stick with it and to press in. And I want to read two sentences. This is you kind of being vulnerable in your book, but I grabbed a couple sentences out, and I'll read this because I think it is a setup for kind of the heartbeat of who you are, comes from your dad, who he was, but also I think it's transferable to all of us. So you wrote this: I'm a man who walks with a limp. My spirit, hope, and faith have been broken many times in my short life. But through all the moments in victory and defeat, I have found the path to be a life of destiny. As a result, I've devoted my life to helping other broken people like me engage a hope-filled destiny.
Mhm.
I mean, the brokenness to hope-filled destiny. And I mean, like, I know that that's the mission of this book, mission of the organization you lead. Would you take us in a little further into like, Ben, why this book? Why these themes? Why
Yeah.
is this the path you've chosen?
Yeah. I think, I can't, go through this and not talk about Jesus saving my life. And I mean, I'd be dead without him. I'd have gotten into cocaine. I remember I gave my life to Christ, and then my buddies started snorting cocaine, and there was some power in me that was able, it was the Holy Spirit. I didn't know it at the time, that gave me the self control to say no, when before that I would take and snort and do anything, right? Drink, whatever. But, you know, he saved my life. And when I came home from combat and I was dealing with PTSD and having nightmares and tremors, that I was doing horrific things and my life was falling apart. It was the church, it was the local church, and it was Jesus through men that saved my life when I wanted to take my life, you know? And he has kept me in the game time and time again. And so I think you can't have you can't not have a humility knowing who I would have become without him, and even how broken I am with him, and struggling with sin and struggling with sexual temptation, struggling, you know, I've been sober for 3 years and am tempted by alcohol regularly, to want to just, you know, numb out. And, you know, that I made a decision to quit drinking because I don't think I'm an alcoholic, but I definitely have all the tendencies to be one. And there's things like that where, you know, you walk with this just humility, knowing, dude, this is who I am apart from Christ. And even with Christ, I still carry all of these struggles. And so, you know, I think that there's a piece there. But then also, you know, when we did that event in Daytona, God had given me a very clear vision that we were going to do a national event to honor Vietnam veterans, and that it was going to be huge. I mean, we had over 35,000, 40,000 in attendance. It was crazy. And I had this vision of how we could sell tickets and it would cover a good portion of the $6 million bill. So I raised 4 million in donor cash, through generous, amazing donors that gave so sacrificially. And then I'm like, we can get this other 2 mil from ticket sales. Well, we only sold 500 grand. So we finished that event 1.5 million in debt with no vision of where we're going to go next, no money in the bank. I had to lay over 25 people off. And I mean, my organization has only been resurrected from death to life because of Jesus and his favor. And if I'm honest, Jeff, as we were talking about before on this call, God was speaking to my heart like, hey, pull the gas off of this ticket thing, man. You need to put some other areas, you know, cut the, you know, he was speaking, and I wouldn't do it. I was so stubborn in my pride of what I wanted to create. And it failed. I failed hard. And was the event a success? Heck yeah. Thousands of, you know, veterans healed and saved and all that kind of stuff. But financially, it destroyed my organization, and it had to be resurrected from death to life, which now we're doing amazing, but that's only by his grace. And so I think, like, I walk with a limp because of growing up in a super unhealthy home, going to combat, dealing with trauma, but then also walking with Christ and the struggles that I still have and that I have to surrender to every day. And then the big mistakes that I've made, while chasing this life of purpose and destiny, while continuing to have relentless pursuit.
Yeah. Story. I mean, you've shared a few parts of your story, but story, I just want to remind everyone listening the power of a story of a man, of a dad who sticks with it and has the valleys and has the mountaintops. The peaks and the valleys like make for a good story. And God's right there with us in the valleys, and he's right there with us. But it's like it's not a good story if it's all mountaintop. It just isn't a good story. I
Lord of the Rings wouldn't be what it is without all the valleys. Yeah.
Yeah, but you even say though in your book, engage your destiny, practical ways to run after your God-given purpose. Like men who run that are maybe sometimes you say walk with a limp. Like the limp is there, the injuries happened, the hurts happened, but man, we can still be running. We can run. And what would you say to the dad who's like, I feel kind of stalled out. I'm not running towards a purpose. I'm just like making it through. How would you encourage that dad?
Oh man. First, I would say, brother, are you obeying God? Is He put things on your heart that you're numbing out with alcohol and partying, or hanging out and having fun and playing games and boys and their toys? Like, are you obeying Him? And I want to just come right out and say, like, dude, you're going to stand before Him and you're going to give an account for everything you did do and everything you didn't do. And that's a very sobering deal. And I want to stand there and say, yes, sir, Roger that. I accomplished, John Bevere did that book, Driven by Eternity. And, where's my 10,000 souls, or however he did it. And man, I just think it's so important to live with that mindset. And it doesn't have to be a fear-based mindset, but it's like this is the reality of the kingdom. And there is heaven and hell, and there are realities to us being disobedient, and there is free will, and there's consequences for that. And I think that's part of kind of the military coming out, because if you don't do your job, people die. And it's the same thing in the kingdom. Like there's a reason that Paul used the reference of the soldier so much, because we are in a war for the souls of men. So I think that's my first answer, and then my second is, you know, um, who told you you weren't enough? Who told you that you weren't enough? The people who bullied me in high school told me I wasn't enough. You know, um, the lack of um, emotional connection to my dad made me feel like I wasn't enough. You know, but I think if I'm being honest, a lot of my passion and pursuit has come out of that 16-year-old that was getting beat up and made feel like he was worthless. And after he got beat up out on the recess court, no one came by his side and everyone stood there and laughed at him. And that young man made a decision that I'm going to become everything that I think is awesome. And I'm going to pursue everything that I want in life to prove to them that I'm enough. And I think at the end of the day, it's never going to be enough. So, who told you you weren't enough? And where are you at on the spectrum of doing it all in your own strength, or being completely immobilized because it's safe and because you're scared and you're hurting?
Yeah. Ben, there's a quote that's not in your book, but I couldn't help but think about this quote when I was reading through Engage Your Destiny. And it was written, I think, 34 years ago. The year 1990, Robert Bly wrote the book Iron John, a book about men. And I actually haven't finished the entire book, so I can't necessarily recommend the book. But this quote gets, I think, after what we're talking about, it's just another layer of saying, man, you're not done. You're not done. So here's the quote, and I want you just to respond to it. And I just want to hear what it stirs up within you. Where a man's wound is, that is where his genius will be. Wherever the wound appears in our psyche, whether from a alcoholic father, a shaming mother, a shaming father, an abusing mother, whatever it stems from, whether it stems from isolation, disability, or disease, that is precisely the place for which we will give our major gift to the community.
Whew.
How does that stir you, and what would you add into this conversation we've been having for the dads?
Yeah, I love the imagery of the wounding being the gift that you have for the world. And that is the warrior poet. That is the one who is willing to lay down their shield and be honest about their struggles, and be vulnerable. Um, the strongest men that I know are willing to laugh at, or be totally honest about their shortcomings. Um, I'm a true founder. I think everything I do is going to work, you know? And it's like, and when I go into meetings, I throw that out there. Guys, this is a huge weakness. I think everything is going to work. Show me how it's not, you
Yeah.
know? And so I think we can lean into some of those woundings, from a sense of humility and being honest that, you know what, I'm never going to be perfect until Christ comes back, or until I go home, and in Him I'm a new creature, and that gives me such a sense of peace and satisfaction, that my woundings are okay. It's okay to be vulnerable. And, we're living in a society today where the suicide rate is through the roof. We have the highest rates of anxiety and depression. People feel the most confused, the most they've ever struggled. Our political climate is a complete disaster. I mean, there's no better time to be vulnerable with what's going on and where we're struggling and to lay our shields down and to be honest about what's going on. Being a dad's hard. I mean, I was struggling this morning when my son was having a tantrum, and he's been having a few too many of them lately. And I'm ready to get, you know, military. And I'm navigating that. And I'll be honest, Jeff, I don't have a clue what to do. I don't know what I'm doing. My dad's dead. I don't really have, that father figure in my life. I've got a lot of great mentors and friends, but I'm kind of doing this on my own, and I feel alone in that. I feel scared in that. I'm afraid of making mistakes with my son and, the few times that my anger's gotten let loose, and dude, it's really hard. And just the more vulnerable we can be about it, the more we can relate because everyone's going through it.
Yeah. Ben, I was going to jump back that direction of just rookie dad advice, something that someone shared with you that was like in that specific moment that you just shared, like you don't know yet how you're going to navigate through that specific thing. But what about in general, the first 2.5 years of dad life? What was one of the most helpful, or maybe one or two things that someone did share with you and it proved to be helpful? Anything you
Yeah.
gathered from other people that you're like, oh, that was helpful?
Um, I'm in the toddler phase, and so I have a really fast new friend who's come into our life, and we've just really been able to build community with them. And he said to me, because he has a 2-year old as well, never negotiate with a terrorist. And I said, Roger that. And since because I grew up in such an unhealthy home,
Sure.
right? Emotionally, I kind of don't trust myself into how far do I go and what I do and what I don't do. And my wife is like a spiritual gangster, and my wife is way smarter than I am. And so sometimes I feel like the dummy in the room who's just like, I don't know what to do. And so that has really helped me never negotiate with a terrorist. And it's like, I'm not bending on this boundary. And I'm going to stay calm and I'm going to do it in a healthy way. But I am holding the line come hell or high water. And I've had to do that with my son, and truly, and it can go on for 15 minutes, but I am not coming off this boundary. That has helped me immensely. And then I think like just being able to to talk to other families and hear them say that the funnest and happiest days of their lives was when their kids were the youngest. And that's when it's the most energy, it's the most tiring, there's the most sleep issues, like all that kind of stuff, right? And so my wife and I are really pushing ourselves. We were talking about it last night. No complaining. Be grateful for this season.
It's good.
I know we only have one, but god dang it if he isn't a handful. I mean, he's the spitting image of me. He's so intense, so powerful, and he's so sensitive. Like, this is my son, right? And so it's like this gets a flipping handful. And I'm not going to complain, and I'm going to be grateful because these days are going to be over super fast. So
So good. So good. We're going to link out in the show notes, Engage Your Destiny, your book you just launched, and then you got the podcast that surrounds it, your ministry, Engage Your Destiny, the work you're doing all over the country and all over the world with serving folks who serve in the military. So thank you, Ben. This has been a great conversation. I was hoping to invite you. Would you pray for all of us dads as we say goodbye?
yeah, Lord, we just come before you to lay down our shields and to open up the woundings in our hearts. And Father, I just pray for anyone who's been listening to this and they sense that area of disobedience where they haven't taken that next step, Father, that you would meet them as the scriptures say, I have faith, Lord, help me in my unbelief. For anyone who's just struggling with their unbelief, myself included. And Father, I just pray that we would take that next step and that, Lord, any connections that need to take place for the healing of the father wound and the areas where dads failed anyone who is listening, God, that you would orchestrate that healing, that you would orchestrate that incredible moment right now by the power of the Holy Spirit, and that the enemy would not be able to steal, kill, or destroy, or take away from these men the day that has been ordained for them to come into true healing with their past and have peace with it. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.